UFC Fight Night, Lewis vs. Nascimento is this Saturday, and for each fight, including the prelims, I'm going to compare stats, review recent fight history, analyze the results of each of my 7 data science prediction models, give a combined weighted prediction of those models, and then give a final prediction which considers both quantitative and, more importantly, qualitative information combined. Later this week, I'll also upload a video covering promising underdogs and inexpensive favorites to highlight some opportunities for you all. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid mistakes, and find some value bets, or for entertainment and information purposes to prepare for this upcoming event. Please go ahead and like and subscribe if you find this interesting, informative, or helpful, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you want to support me through that for $5 or $10 a month. Definitely not required, but it would be very much appreciated. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, the fight simulations, the charts and graphs, and updating the website takes hours every single day and week, so I'd really appreciate the support. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown. I can't believe I'm over 700 subscribers now. It truly means the world to me that we can all continue to share this passion for MMA together and build our community. So let's go ahead and jump right in. For the first fight, we have JJ Aldrich versus Veronica Hardy. Let's go ahead and review their stats. JJ Aldrich is 5 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 67 inches, and she's 31 years old. On the other hand, Veronica Hardy is 5 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 64 inches and is 28 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, JJ Aldrich lands 4.05 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. Veronica Hardy, on the other hand, lands 3.27 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, JJ Aldrich lands 0.71 takedowns on average at a low 25% accuracy, while Veronica Hardy, on the other hand, lands a higher 1.27 takedowns on average with a higher 41% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, JJ Aldrich absorbs 4.53 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense, whereas Veronica Hardy absorbs 4.1 strikes per minute with a 46% striking defense and a 57% takedown defense. Now let's check out JJ Aldrich's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Montana De La Rosa via unanimous decision, which was back in October 7, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that she's defeated include Liang Na, Jillian Robertson, Vanessa Demopoulos, and Courtney Casey. Some of the opponents that she's lost to include Ariana Da Silva, Erin Blanchfield, and Macy Barber. Her total record is 13 wins and 6 losses, and out of those 13 wins, 3 were KO/TKOs, 10 were decision victories, and she has no submissions, which gives her a low 23% finish rate. Out of her 6 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 2 were submissions, and 3 were decision losses. Aldrich also has 2 first-round finishes. Recently, she's won 3 out of her last 5 fights, and she's currently on a 2-fight win streak. Her most recent win was, again, back in October 2023, and her most recent loss was back in March of 2023. She's also fought a few fights in Invicta FC, and she's won a majority of them. Now let's check out Veronica Hardy's recent fight history. Recently, Hardy's coming off of a win against Jamie Lynn Horth via split decision, which was back in December 2nd, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that she's defeated include Jamie Lynn Horth, Juliana Miller, and Pollyanna Viana. And some of the notable opponents that she's lost to include B. Malecki, Andrea Lee, and Ashley Evans Smith. Her total record is 8 wins and 4 losses, and out of her 8 wins, 1 was a KO/TKO, 2 were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which also gives her a low but slightly higher 38% finishing rate. Out of her 4 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and 2 were decision losses. She also has 2 first-round finishes. She's recently won 3 out of her last 5 fights, and she's currently on a 2-fight win streak. Her most recent win was back in December of 2023, and her most recent loss was all the way back in March 2020. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat-based research and fight film study observations. So first, let's talk about the stats. 1 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards JJ Aldrich, and 6 lean towards Veronica Hardy. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get about a 61% probability for Veronica Hardy. Now for my final prediction, I knocked that down a little bit, and I give her a 60% probability of victory. And the reason I knocked it down just a little bit is because JJ Aldrich has a height advantage of 1 inch. She also has a reach advantage of 3 inches. She lands a little bit more strikes per minute. She has a slightly better striking accuracy, almost non-existent of a difference, but still. she has a 14% higher striking defense and a 10% higher takedown defense. So the reason I'm picking Veronica Hardy, at least statistically speaking, is due to the fact that Veronica Hardy is 3 years younger, she absorbs less strikes per minute, she lands more takedowns on average, and with a better accuracy. But let me do you guys a favor. Let's step away from the stats for a bit. I know everyone says I focus on stats a lot, and some of the people that are new to the channel, they don't really think that I do research or look outside the statistics. So what I'm going to start doing is stepping away from the stats after giving you guys the statistical predictions and give you guys more support for my reasoning. So Veronica Hardy has pulled off upsets in her previous fights, and her fighting style is very aggressive. She's also more comfortable on the ground compared to Aldrich and proficient in her submissions. Aldrich also has a striking-oriented style, so Hardy should aim to leverage her grappling here where she does have an advantage. Hardy is also resilient and mentally tough. She's gotten over a few concussions and things like that throughout her career. Plus, her recent performances indicate that she's improved her strategy and her execution under pressure. She's also shown some improvements in her defensive maneuvering, which is very crucial against a fighter like Aldrich. Now, Aldrich has a background in Taekwondo, and it's no surprise that her primary weapon will be striking, and she'll look to try to keep the fight standing. Aldrich will keep a high pace and pressure, which might prevent Hardy from setting up takedowns and controlling the pace. Plus, if Aldrich sharpened her takedown defense, then this will not be an easy win for Hardy. Just playing devil's advocate for a second here. However, Aldrich has shown inconsistencies in her fights, and Hardy can capitalize on her weaknesses here. Hardy is coming off of 2 wins, and her performances, such as the one against Juliana Miller, suggest that she's definitely evolved as a fighter. I don't see her finishing Aldrich in this fight, but I do see her using her grappling skills and controlling the fight. This one will likely go to the judges for a unanimous decision, and Hardy will likely get her hands raised. Moving on to the next fight, we have Jared Gooden versus Kevin Jousset. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Jared Gooden is 6 feet tall with a reach of 77 inches and is 30 years old. And on the other hand, we have Kevin Jousset, who is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 75 inches, which is 2 inches shorter, and at 31 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Jared Gooden lands 5.08 strikes per minute at a 49% accuracy. And Kevin Jousset, on the other hand, lands 8.23 strikes per minute at a slightly higher accuracy of 55%. As far as grappling goes, Jared Gooden lands 0.67 takedowns at a pretty decent accuracy, while Kevin Jousset, on the other hand, lands 1.51 takedowns on average with a 66% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Jared Gooden absorbs 6.68 strikes per minute with a 48% striking defense and a 65% takedown defense, whereas Kevin Jousset absorbs 5.1 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and a decent takedown defense. Let's talk about Jared Gooden's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Wellington Turman, which was via submission back in December 2nd, 2023. And some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include DeMarcus Jackson, Doug Usher, which was actually a title fight, Curtis Millender, and Aaron Haiba. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Carlston Harris, Randy Brown, and Abubakar Nurmagomedov. His total record is 23 wins and 9 losses, and out of his 23 wins, 11 were KO/TKOs, 7 were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which gives him a pretty good 78% finishing rate. And out of his 9 losses, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, and the other 7 were all decision losses. Gooden also has 4 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently coming off of a win into this fight. Now let's talk about Kevin Jousset's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Song Kinan via unanimous decision, which was back in December 9, 2023. He has a total record of 10 wins and only 2 losses, and out of his 10 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him a 60% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, and the other was a decision loss. He also has 4 first-round finishes, and he's recently winning all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's also on a 5-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in December of 2023, and his most recent loss was in July of 2022. Now let's take a look at what the prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final picks that take that and add other non-statistics-based research and fight film studying observations as well. None of the prediction models lean towards Jared Gooden, and all 7 lean towards Kevin Jousset. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 72% probability for Kevin. Now, for my final prediction, I give him a slightly less confident 70% probability, and that's due to the fact that Jared Gooden is a year younger, he has a reach advantage of 2 inches, he has a 34% higher takedown accuracy, just a couple of statistical things that made me knock that down a little bit. Now, the reason I'm picking Kevin is due to the fact that Kevin has a height advantage of 2 inches, he lands more strikes per minute at about 3.15, he has a 7% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 1.58 less strikes per minute, he has a 5% higher striking defense, he lands 0.84 more takedowns on average, and he has a 35% higher takedown defense, and lands a little bit more submissions on average as well. But let's step away from the stats for just a second. He's better with his striking, his takedowns, and his counterpunching as well. Jousset will use his size advantage to manage the distance and land strikes while staying out of Gooden's range. And more importantly, Jousset has a background in judo, and his experience in many MMA organizations has given him a very versatile skill set. His judo will be advantageous in managing Gooden's aggressive striking by potentially taking the fight to the ground where he can control the pace and positioning. He's also been on a winning streak, and his fights, such as the unanimous decision against Song Ki-nan, show that he's able to compete effectively over the distance of a fight, which he'll need to use against a hard hitter such as Gooden. Jousset also has trained at City Kickboxing, which has a strong reputation of training intelligent and strategic fighters, such as your guys like Israel Adesanya, Alexander Volkanovski, Kai Kara-France, Dan Hooker, Tyson Pedro, just to name a few. Kevin has also won 83% of his total fights, 50% of which he finished via KO/TKO. He's currently on that 5-fight win streak, and he's won both of his UFC fights, and he's never lost back-to-back fights in his professional fighting career. There's a slim chance that he finishes Gooden, but most likely this will go to the judges for a unanimous decision victory. After he tires Gooden out, he controls him, and he uses his elusiveness to avoid those powerful shots. I honestly think that Kevin has the potential to be a threat in this division, and with a win this weekend, he'll likely continue that run. For the next fight, we have Charles Johnson versus Jake Hadley. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Charles Johnson is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 33 years old. On the other hand, Jake Hadley is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 27 years old. When it comes to striking, Charles Johnson lands 4.45 strikes per minute at a 55% accuracy. Jake Hadley, on the other hand, lands 3.42 strikes per minute at a lower 44% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Charles Johnson lands 0.48 takedowns at a low 23% accuracy, while Jake Hadley, on the other hand, lands 0.32 takedowns at a 25% accuracy. So they're pretty similar when it comes to the grappling stats. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Charles Johnson absorbs 3.15 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and a 63% takedown defense, whereas Jake Hadley absorbs 3.2 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a lower 35% takedown defense. Now let's check out Charles Johnson's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Azat Maksum via unanimous decision back in February 3rd, 2024. He's defeated guys like Jimmy Flick, Carlos Mota, which was a title fight, and João Camilo, which was also a title fight. And he's also lost to guys such as Rafael Esteban, Cody Durden, Ode Osborne, and Mohamed Mokaev. Also Brandon Royval, almost forgot about that one. So his total record is 14 wins and 6 losses, which is not the best total record to have. And out of his 14 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, and 5 of them were decision victories, which gives him a pretty average 64.3% finishing rate, nothing too spectacular. Out of his 6 losses, none of them were KO/TKOs or submissions, all 6 of them were decision losses. And he also has 4 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was, again, back in February of this year. His most recent loss goes back to November of 2023. Now let's check out Jake Hadley's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Cody Durden via unanimous decision, which was back in August 5th, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that he's faced include Malcolm Gordon, Carlos Candelario, Mitch Raposo, and Luke Shanks, which was a title fight. And so his total record is 10 wins and 2 losses, and out of his 10 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 5 of them were submissions, and 2 have been decision victories, which gives him a pretty decent 80% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, both of them were decision losses. He also has 5 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in March 18, 2023, and his most recent loss was back in August 5th, 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film studying as well. 3 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Charles Johnson, and 4 lean towards Jake Hadley. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 52% probability for Charles Johnson. However, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here after doing all my research, and I'm going to give Jake Hadley a 53.9% probability of victory. That's due to the fact that Jake Hadley is 6 years younger. He has a little bit of a better striking defense, he has a slightly better takedown accuracy, and he tends to land more submissions on average. But let's step away from the stats for just a little bit. If you watch a few fights that Jake Hadley is in, you'll realize that he has noteworthy technical skills and good fight IQ. He's great at adapting a strategy based on his opponent's weaknesses, which is absolutely crucial against a fighter that has a dynamic fighting style such as Charles Johnson. Hadley's ground game and submission skills are also solid, which will likely be advantageous against Johnson, who hasn't really been exposed to high-caliber submission artists previously. I also wanted to point out to you all how Hadley has been focusing on enhancing his striking to complement his ground game, which will develop him into a well-rounded fighter who may have the upper hand in both the stand-up and ground exchanges coming into this fight. His recent performances have had key improvements, and he's carrying some confidence coming into this fight, which is pretty good for his mental strength and his resilience. Some last few things that I wanted to mention for you all is that he has won 83% of his total fights, 50% of which was via submission, and he's finished 80% of his total wins. His technical skill and strategic preparation will likely get the job done in this fight, and there's a good chance that he may get a submission, but I'm kind of leaning more towards this going to the judges, and Johnson just being outclassed by Hadley. In the next fight, we have Billy Goff versus Trey Waters. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Billy Goff is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 25 years old. And on the other hand, Trey Waters is 6 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 77 inches and is 29 years old. When it comes to striking, Billy Goff lands 10.22 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. Trey Waters, on the other hand, lands 6.45 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Billy Goff lands 4.04 takedowns on average at a 40% accuracy, while Trey Waters, on the other hand, lands 0.78 takedowns on average at a 50% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Billy Goff absorbs 4.3 strikes per minute with a 64% striking defense and a pretty decent takedown defense as well, whereas Trey Waters absorbs 3.95 strikes per minute with a 61% striking defense and a 77% takedown defense. Now let's check out Billy Goff's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Yusuke Kinoshita via KO/TKO back in August 26, 2023. His total record is 9 wins and only 2 losses, and out of his 9 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs and 2 were decision victories, which gives him a pretty decent 78% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 4 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a win streak of 7 wins in a row. Billy Goff's most recent win was back in August 2023, and his most recent loss was like 5 years ago back in September 2019. Now let's check out Trey Waters' recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Josh Quinlan via unanimous decision, which was back in April 2023. And some of the notable opponents that he's faced include Jalen Fuller, which was a championship fight, Ben Bennett, and Elias Ramirez. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Gabriel Bonfim. So Trey Waters has a total record of 8 wins and only 1 loss. And out of his 8 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him a pretty respectable 75% finishing rate. Now, out of his 1 loss, it was a submission loss. He also has 2 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of 2 wins in a row into this fight. His most recent win was, again, back in April of 23, and his most recent loss was back in September of 2022. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations into mind as well. So 4 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Billy Goff, and 3 lean towards Trey Waters. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 52.5% probability for Billy Goff to win. For my final prediction, I give him a slightly less confident 51% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Trey Waters has a height advantage of 7 inches into this fight. He also has a reach advantage of 5 inches, and you got to think that that plays a little bit of a role in how the exchanges will go. He also absorbs a little bit less strikes per minute, and he has a better takedown accuracy. But the reason I'm picking Billy Goff, at least statistically speaking, is due to the fact that Billy Goff is 4 years younger. He lands about 4 more strikes per minute, a little bit less than that. He has a slightly higher striking accuracy and a better striking defense, and he lands more takedowns on average. I think it's about 3 more takedowns on average, and he has better takedown defense as well. I think it's about 23% better. But let's go ahead and step away from the stats for a little bit. Goff is a versatile fighter who not only has a strong emphasis on striking, but has crazy knockout power as well. He's ended fights early on multiple occasions, and his ability to switch stances effectively allows him to adapt his striking angles and kind of confuse his opponents, but he's able to maintain this interesting type of offense unpredictability. Billy will need to close the distance and apply aggressive forward pressure and use those feints to create openings to get to the inside. He will also need to attack those long legs that Water has to slow him down and disrupt his rhythm. Doing this will reduce some of the advantages that Waters has coming into this fight. Goff will also have to use his ability to fight from orthodox and southpaw to create some striking angles, which he's fully capable of doing and he has done before, and that's going to create some unique angles that Waters will inevitably find very difficult to defend against. I could see Goff piecing him up, brawling when he needs to, while being technical when he needs to as well. A few last things I want to mention is that Billy has won 82% of his total fights, of which he's finished 78% of, like we said, and he's on a 7-fight winning streak, and he hasn't lost since 2019. For all those reasons and everything I've discussed, Goff is going to get the KO/TKO in this one. For the next fight, we have Tabitha Ricci versus Tecia Pennington, and if that name sounds a little bit unfamiliar, it's because she used to be Tecia Torres before she got married to Raquel Pennington. Anyways, let's go ahead and review their stats. Tabitha Ricci is 5 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 61 inches and is 29 years old. And on the other hand, Tecia Pennington is 5 feet 1 inch tall as well with a reach of 60 inches, just 1 inch shorter, and is 5 years older at 34 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Tabitha Ricci lands 4.41 strikes per minute and is landing at a 37% accuracy. And Tecia Pennington, on the other hand, lands 4.74 strikes per minute at a higher 48% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Tabitha Ricci lands 3.39 takedowns on average at a 41% accuracy, while Tecia Pennington, on the other hand, lands 0.66 takedowns on average at a much less 14% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Tabitha Ricci absorbs 4.86 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and a 71% takedown defense, while Tecia Pennington absorbs 3.59 strikes per minute with a 61% striking defense and a 61% takedown defense as well. Now let's take a look at Tabitha Ricci's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a loss against Lupi Godinez via split decision back in November 11, 2023. And some of the notable opponents that she's defeated include Gillian Robertson, Jessica Penne, Pollyanna Viana, Maria Oliveira, and Shauna Ormsby. Her total professional record is 9 wins and only 2 losses, and out of her 9 wins, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 3 of them were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which gives her a mediocre 44.5% finishing rate. Now, out of her 2 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO and the other was a decision loss. She also has 2 first-round finishes. Recently, she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, but she is coming off of a loss into this fight. Her most recent win was in June 2023, and her most recent loss was, again, in November 2023. Now, going on the other side, let's check out Tecia Pennington's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a loss against Mackenzie Dern via split decision back in April 2022. Some of the notable opponents that she's defeated include Angela Hill, Sam Hughes, Brianna Fortino, Michelle Watterson-Gomez, and Juliana Lima. And some of the opponents that she's lost to include Mackenzie Dern, Marina Rodriguez, Zhang Wei Li, and Joanna Jacek. Her total record is pretty mediocre. It's 13 wins and 6 losses, and out of her 13 wins, only 1 was a KO/TKO, only 1 was a submission, and the other 11 went to the decision for her victories, which gives her a very low 15.4% finishing rate. All 6 of her losses were decision losses. She also has only 1 first-round finish. She's recently winning 3 out of her last 5 fights, which is pretty good, but she is coming off of a loss into this one. I was having some trouble because of the last name when it comes to the data and running the prediction models, so I couldn't really run these 2 through my prediction models because of that. However, the odd probabilities are giving Tabitha Ricci a small 53.5% probability of victory. That's very narrow, but I do generally agree with that because she is the younger fighter. She has a small reach advantage. She lands more takedowns on average and with a higher takedown accuracy, and she has better takedown defense and lands a little bit more submissions as well. But those are all statistical reasons. Let me now step away from the stats and talk about this fight. Tabitha Ricci has a black belt in judo, which contributes significantly to her grappling and her ground control capabilities, as we've seen in her previous fights. She has the ability to control her opponents, which could be troublesome against a striker like Pennington. She's secured multiple wins through decisions and submissions, and she's carrying some momentum coming into this fight. She also trains at Paragon BJJ, and her grappling and ground fighting training and preparation of this fight were likely tailored to exploit Pennington's weaknesses. A few last things that I wanted to mention are that she's won 82% of her total fights, most of which were via decision and submission, and although she's coming off of a split decision loss, she's won 4 fights in a row prior to that. She has respectable defensive capabilities as well, and when you pair that with her superior takedown skills, you can see how she's positioned to likely dominate this fight. I think she gets the decision here, or even a late submission if you want to take a little bit of risk. In the next fight, we have Terrance McKinney versus Esteban Ribovics. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Terrance McKinney is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 73 inches and is 29 years old. And on the other hand, Esteban Ribovics is also 5 feet 9 inches tall, but he has a 4-inch smaller reach at 69 inches and is 1 year younger at 28 years old. When it comes to striking, Terrance McKinney lands 4.46 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy, and Esteban Ribovics, on the other hand, lands 6.16 strikes per minute at also a 52% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Terrance McKinney lands 3.52 takedowns on average with a low 36% accuracy, and Esteban Ribovics, on the other hand, lands only 0.95 takedowns on average, but at a better 66% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Terrance McKinney absorbs 2.5 strikes per minute with a 44% striking defense and an 85% takedown defense, whereas Esteban Ribovics absorbs 3.4 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and a lower 60% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Terrance McKinney's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Brandon Moreau via KO/TKO back in October 14, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Mike Breeden, Eric Gonzalez, and Matt Frivola. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Ismail Bonfim, Drew Dober, and Derek Minor. Terrance McKinney's total record is 15 wins and 6 losses, and out of those 15 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, and 8 of them were submissions. So he's finished 100% of his fights out of 15 fights. And out of his 6 losses, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, which you could attribute to his aggressive style, and 2 of them were submissions, so he's had no decision losses. He's also had 14 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight win streak. His most recent win was in October 2023, and his most recent loss was in July 2023. Now let's check out Esteban Ribovics' recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Kamuela Kirk via unanimous decision back in July 2023. And some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Thomas Paul, Franco Aranda, which was a title fight, and Javier Basurto, which was also a title fight. His total record is 12 wins and only 1 loss, and that 1 loss was against Loic Ruziboev. Now, out of those 12 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 5 of them were submissions, and only 1 was a decision victory, which also gives him a very high finishing rate of 91%. And that loss was a decision loss. He also has 6 first-round finishes. Recently, he's winning 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was back in July 2023, and his most recent loss was a few months before then in March 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat-based research and fight film study observation as well. 6 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Terrance McKinney, and only 1 is leaning towards Esteban Ribovics. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 59% probability for Terrance McKinney. However, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Esteban Ribovics a very narrow 50.4% probability of victory. And there's several reasons for that, but statistically speaking, he's 1 year younger, he lands 1.7 more strikes per minute, he has a 8% higher striking defense and a 30% higher takedown accuracy. But stepping away from the stats, Ribovics has demonstrated significant striking power in his previous fights, with multiple knockouts. He has the ability to deliver powerful and precise strikes, which is a critical advantage against McKinney, who we know has been vulnerable to knockouts in the past. Ribovics has shown resilience in his fights, and he has overcome early setbacks to secure victories later on in his fights. The durability he has is an absolute asset to his fight game, especially if this fight goes past the first round. He's also carrying momentum on his side. Plus, again, McKinney has struggled with knockouts on multiple occasions. He's an inconsistent fighter, and even though he does have his own impressive set of capabilities, his performance variability could be something that Ribovics will capitalize on. Ribovics also has the ability to adapt, and he's won 92% of his total fights, 50% of which was via KO/TKO, and he's finished 91% of his fights. He's a dangerous finisher, and he's coming off of a win. He started his career off with 11 wins in a row before finally losing to Ruziboev, which even that was a unanimous decision. He did not get finished, and that was back in UFC 285, I believe. I know this is a very unpopular opinion, and some people won't agree with me here, but I'm leaning towards Ribovics in this fight after doing all my research and my analysis. In the next fight, we have Chase Hooper versus Viacheslav Borshchev. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Chase Hooper is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 74 inches and is 24 years old. And on the other hand, Viacheslav is 6 feet tall with a reach of 69 inches, which is 5 inches shorter, and he's 32 years old, so he's 8 years older. When it comes to striking, Chase Hooper lands 4.86 strikes per minute at a 51% accuracy. Viacheslav, on the other hand, lands 5.82 strikes per minute with a higher accuracy of 58%. As far as grappling goes, Chase Hooper lands 1.42 takedowns on average with a low 22% accuracy, while Viacheslav doesn't really have takedown stats recorded. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Chase Hooper absorbs 3.59 strikes per minute with a 36% striking defense and a 55% takedown defense, whereas Viacheslav absorbs 4.07 strikes per minute with a 56% striking defense and a 36% takedown defense. Now let's check out Chase Hooper's recent fight history. Recently, Chase Hooper's coming off of a win against Jordan Leavitt via submission back in November 2023. Chase Hooper has a total record of 13 wins and 3 losses, and out of his 13 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 6 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision victories, which is a 77% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, and 2 of them were decision losses. He has not been submitted before. Chase Hooper also has 6 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of back-to-back wins into this fight. His most recent win was back in November 2023, and his most recent loss was in October 2022. Now let's check out Vyacheslav Borshchev's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a draw against Nazim Sadikov, which was back in November 11, 2023. Some of the notable opponents he's defeated include Mahashet, Dakota Bush, Chris Duncan, and Corey Dulaney. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Mike Davis, Mark Diakase, and Will Starks. His total record is 7 wins and 3 losses, not the best record, and out of his 7 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, and 1 of them was a decision victory, which does give him a pretty decent 86% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, all 3 of them were decision losses. He's also had 3 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of that draw that I talked about earlier. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film studying observations as well. 6 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Chase Hooper, and only 1 is leaning towards Vyacheslav Borshchev. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 57.4% probability for Chase Hooper. However, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here and give Vyacheslav Borshchev a 50.6% probability of victory. And there's several reasons for that. But first, statistically speaking, he lands about 1 more strike per minute. He has a 7% higher striking accuracy and a 20% higher striking defense. But let's step away from the stats for just a second. Borshchev not only has impressive striking skills, but he has insane power behind his hands. He's delivered several knockouts throughout his career, and against a fighter like Hooper, who has shown vulnerabilities against strikers, that's very critical. He's also bounced back from his losses, he's been in some pressure fights, he's resilient, and he can make the most even out of some rough situations in the octagon. He trains out of Team Alpha Male, so he has some well-known coaches and sparring partners, and he has experience and is focused. If you're wondering who else has fought at Team Alpha Male, they've had guys like Uriah Faber, TJ Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt, Davison Figueiredo, and Clay Guida, and all of those guys have been former champions, whether it's in the UFC or in Clay's case, in Strikeforce. Besides the drama from Team Alpha Male, they've raised and trained some very respectable talent. Also, Hooper doesn't really have the best striking defense, especially against pressure fighters that are very powerful, and you'd best believe that Borshchev knows this coming into this fight. Hooper's also a very predictable fighter, no disrespect to him, but his game plan is always very predictable. He relies on his grappling often, and as long as Borshchev has done the most basic level of due diligence and studying, he'll likely pick up on that and train to keep this fight standing and leverage those striking advantages that he has. Now, a few other things that I wanted to mention are that although Borshchev has only won 64% of his total fights, he's finished 86% of his wins via KO/TKO, and he has the power to get the job done. I personally think that Borshchev gets the KO/TKO in this fight, but it really depends on how prepared he is to handle Hooper's grappling. But I want to hear what you guys have to think about this fight, so let me know in the comments below. In the next fight, we have Joaquin Buckley versus Nursulton Ruziboev. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Joaquin Buckley is 5 feet 8 inches tall. I know I have the wrong number up there, but he's 5 feet 8 inches tall. He has a reach of 76 inches, and he's 30 years old. And on the other hand, we have Nursulton Ruziboev, who is 6 feet 5 inches tall. Yes, that is correct, 6 feet 5 inches tall, with a reach of 76 inches, and is 30 years old. When it comes to striking, Joaquin Buckley lands 4.06 strikes per minute at a 34% accuracy. And Ruziboev, on the other hand, lands 3.93 strikes per minute at a higher 43% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Joaquin Buckley lands 1.4 takedowns on average at a 36% accuracy, while Ruziboev, on the other hand, lands 3.27 takedowns at a pretty decent accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Joaquin Buckley absorbs 3.26 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a 69% takedown defense, whereas Ruziboev absorbs 0.87 strikes per minute with a 80% striking defense and no takedown defense recorded. Now let's check out Joaquin Buckley's recent fight history. Recently, Joaquin Buckley's coming off of a win against Vicente Luque via KO/TKO back in March 2024. Some of the opponents that Joaquin Buckley has defeated include Alex Morono, Andre Fialho, Albert Duraev, and Abdulrazak Al-Hassan. And some of the opponents that he's lost to include Kevin Holland, Chris Curtis, and Nasiruddin Imavov. His total record is 18 wins and 6 losses. Not the greatest record, but out of his 18 wins, 13 of them were KO/TKOs, which is kind of impressive, and the other 5 were decision victories, which gives him a 72.3% finishing rate. Out of his 6 losses, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, which is likely due to his aggressive fighting style, and 2 of them were decision losses. Joaquin Buckley also has 4 first-round finishes, and he's recently won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a 3-fight win streak into this fight. His most recent win was just a few months ago in March 30th, 2024. His most recent loss was all the way back in December of 2022. He's also had several fights in Bellator, and he's won a majority of them. Now, on the other hand, let's check out Nursulton Ruziboev's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Cedric Dumas via KO/TKO, which was back in March 30th, 2024. Now, his total record is 34 wins and 8 losses, and out of his 34 wins, 12 of them were KO/TKOs, 20 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him an insane 94.2% finish rate, which out of 34 fights, that's very impressive. Out of his 8 losses, 1 of them was KO/TKO, 1 of them was a submission, and the remaining 6 were decision losses. He also has 25 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a 10-fight win streak. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film studying as well. 3 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Joaquin Buckley, and 4 of them are leaning towards Nursulton Ruziboev. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 54.5% probability for Ruziboev. However, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Joaquin Buckley a 52.7% probability of victory and there's several reasons for that, but statistically, he tends to land more strikes per minute. But stepping away from the stats for just a little bit, if you've seen Buckley fight, you know he's a fighter that's known for his grit and his striking skill. Even though he doesn't have the height advantage coming into fights or the reach advantage, none of that, he is a gritty fighter. He gets it done. He delivers powerful and precise strikes, and he doesn't just get the job done here. He produces some of the most impressive and scary knockouts in UFC history. And if you don't believe me, please go look up the spinning back kick knockout against Impa. Also, in case you guys didn't know, this card is taking place in St. Louis, which is actually Buckley's hometown. So you already know he's going to have all sorts of crowd support behind his back. That's going to undoubtedly give him some level of confidence coming into this fight. He's also done really well since moving back down to welterweight, and his adaptation to this division and his recent performances suggests that he's well suited to compete at 170 pounds. Plus, here's the thing, Ruziboev is moving down from middleweight to welterweight for this fight, and I don't think that this is getting talked about enough. Even though he's saying that the weight cut is easy for him, if you've been watching MMA for a bit, you know what that does to a fighter. Bouncing around weight classes like that is absolutely no joke. And you might be wondering, well, what's the deal, MMA data guy? It's only 15 pounds. I could lose that by crash dieting. Listen, guys, he's already lean, and that does a number to your body. Not only does it impact your strength and endurance, but research has shown that it affects your recovery, your brain health, and your adaptation as a fighter just isn't as effective when you do that. Also, Ruziboev has some vulnerability against knockouts, which has an opportunity for Buckley written all over it. A few other quick things, he's coming off of 3 wins. He's won 8 out of 12 of his UFC fights. His last loss was back in late 2022. He's recently coming off of a win just this past March. He's also won 75% of his total fights, and he's finished 72% of his wins, which were via KO/TKO. And I know that this probably isn't a popular opinion either. I know a lot of people are going for the other guy here, but if you haven't been able to tell by my reasoning, by my support, research, and analysis, I'm leaning towards a KO/TKO from Buckley. Regardless of what you think or if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. But one thing we can all agree on is that this is going to be a fun fight. In the next fight, we have Diego Ferreira versus Mateusz Rebecki. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Diego Ferreira is 5 feet 8 inches tall with reach of 74 inches and is 39 years old. On the other hand, Mateusz Rebecki is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 66 inches and is 31 years old, which is 8 years of a difference and is huge in MMA from 31 to 39. Anyways, when it comes to striking, Diego Ferreira lands 4.66 strikes per minute at a 37% accuracy. And Mateusz Rebecki, on the other hand, lands 5.31 strikes per minute at a higher 53% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Diego Ferreira lands 0.71 takedowns on average at a 22% accuracy, while Mateusz Rebecki, on the other hand, lands 4.16 takedowns on average at a higher 72% accuracy, which is very impressive. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Diego Ferreira absorbs 3.42 strikes per minute with a 56% striking defense and a 63% takedown defense, whereas Mateusz Rebecki absorbs 2 strikes per minute with a 63% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense. Now let's check out Diego Ferreira's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Michael Johnson via KO/TKO, which was back in May 2023. His total record is 18 wins and only 5 losses, and out of his 18 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 of them were submissions, and 7 of them were decision victories, which gives him a pretty modest 61.2% finishing rate. Out of his 5 losses, 3 of them were via KO/TKO and 2 of them were decision losses. He also has 4 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was back in May 2023, and his most recent loss was back in December 2021. Now let's check out Mateusz Rebecki's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Roosevelt Roberts via submission back in November 2023. Rebecki's total record is 19 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 19 wins, 9 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 of them were submissions, and only 3 were decision victories, which gives him an impressive 84.3% finishing rate. Out of his 1 loss, it was a KO/TKO loss. He has 10 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights. In fact, he's on a 16-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in November 2023, and his most recent loss was all the way back in 2014. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final picks that take that and add other non-statistics based research and fight film study observation as well. Only 1 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Diego Ferreira, and the other 6 are leaning towards Mateusz Rebecki. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 68% probability for Mateusz Rebecki to win. And for my final prediction, I give him a slightly less confident 66% probability of victory. There's a couple reasons for that, but statistically speaking, Diego Ferreira has a height advantage of 2 inches, and he has a reach advantage of 8 inches. But the reason I'm choosing Mateusz Rebecki is due to the fact that he's 8 years younger, he lands 0.65 more strikes per minute, he has a 16% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 1.41 less strikes per minute, he has a 7% higher striking defense, and he lands 3.45 more takedowns on average with a higher takedown accuracy and better takedown defense as well. He also lands about 1 more submission on average. But stepping away from the stats for a little bit, Rebecki is known for his BJJ and for his background in Muay Thai and kickboxing, which, in case you didn't know, he started training at the age of 17 years old. He also has a very strong ground game, which you can tell from his fights where he's won via submission, including that armbar victory against Roosevelt Roberts. And he even has several wins via knockout as well. His approach recently has been a great blend of aggressive striking and tactical grappling. He's effective with his wrestling and controls opponents when needed. Now, I know you might be concerned about his pacing and his cardio if you've observed him, but he's proven himself to be able to manage high-intensity fights over multiple rounds. Given Ferreira's weakness to knockouts, Rebecki will most likely apply pressure early on in the fight, which might exploit Ferreira's defensive gaps, while also using feints and some varying attack angles to keep Ferreira off balance. And after looking through their fights, I'd say Rebecki has a slight advantage when it comes to grappling and his ground game as well. He's won 95% of his total fights, while finishing 84% of his wins, and again, he's on that crazy 16-fight win streak. And I know that past performances might not be indicative of future outcomes, but you still have to understand how good you have to be on a 16-fight win streak in MMA. He's also won all 3 of his UFC fights, and his most recent loss was all the way back in 2014. I know that year feels like it was just yesterday, but that was 10 years ago. Now look, I'll be honest. In order for Rebecki to win this fight, he seriously needs to pace himself and efficiently utilize his stamina, because if he doesn't, it will be troublesome for him. But I do see him using his striking to manage his range and maintain a high but controlled aggression. Eventually, I could see him finding an opening and an opportunity and landing a powerful, damaging shot or several shots to get him the KO/TKO in this fight. In the next fight, we have Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Robelis Despaigne. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Waldo Cortes-Acosta is 6 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 78 inches and is 32 years old. And on the other hand, Robelis Despaigne is 6 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 84 inches and is 35 years old. Now, before we get into their fighting stats, I want to let you guys know that Robelis Despaigne's stats come from only 1 fight. So when it comes to striking, Waldo Cortes-Acosta lands 6.13 strikes per minute at a 47% accuracy. Robelis Despaigne, on the other hand, lands 23.33 strikes per minute at a 77% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Waldo Cortes-Acosta absorbs 4.02 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and a 60% takedown defense, whereas Robelis Despaigne absorbs 6.67 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and no recorded takedown defense. Now let's check out Waldo Cortes-Acosta's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Andrei Arlovsky via unanimous decision, which was back in January of 2024. Some notable opponents that he's defeated include Lucas Bresky, Chase Sherman, Jared Vandera, and Danilo Suzart. His total record is 11 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 11 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 5 were decision victories, which gives him a modest 55% finishing rate. And his 1 loss was a decision loss. He didn't get finished. It wasn't a submission, nor did he get knocked out or anything. Waldo Cortes-Acosta also has 3 first-round finishes, and recently he's been doing pretty well. He's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a winning streak of 2 wins back-to-back. His most recent win was in January of 2024, and his most recent loss was in April of 2023. Now let's check out Robelis Despaigne's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Josh Parisian via KO/TKO, which was back in March of 2024. His total record is 5 wins and no loss, and all 5 of his wins were KO/TKOs. which means that not only does he have a 100% finishing rate, but all 5 of those finishes came within the first round, which is insane. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film studying as well. Only 1 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Waldo Cortes-Acosta, and the other 6 are leaning towards Robelis Despaigne. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 60% probability for Robelis Despaigne to win. Now for my final prediction, I give him a slightly less confident 58% probability of victory, and there's a couple reasons for that, but statistically speaking, Waldo Cortes-Acosta is 3 years younger and he absorbs 2.65 less strikes per minute. But the reason that I'm picking Robelis Despaigne, at least statistically, is due to the fact that he has a height advantage of 3 inches, he has a reach advantage of 6 inches, he lands 17 more strikes per minute and has a 30% higher striking accuracy and 8% higher striking defense. But again, that's all based on 1 fight, so let's step away from the stats for just a little bit. Despaigne is an Olympic Taekwondo bronze medalist. I don't know if you all knew that, but I wanted to bring that to light. He's brought those unique skills over to MMA. His Taekwondo background gives him an edge when it comes to his striking, especially with his sharp kicks and his distance maintenance. He has insane power as well, as all of his previous fights, again, were finished via KO/TKO, and they were all within the first round. After looking into both of these fighters' past performances, I'd say Despaigne has a bit of a speed advantage as well. He's really good at executing these rapid and powerful strikes, which often overwhelm his opponents. Now, again, he's never lost. He's coming off of a 5-fight win streak, and he just won this past March. He's finished all 5 of those fights, and again, it's all in the first round. Based on that, and based on the weaknesses of Waldo Cortes-Acosta, I think he's going to get another KO/TKO in this fight. He has some serious talent, some serious power, and he has a lot of potential. In the next fight, we have Alex Caceres versus Sean Woodson. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Alex is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 73 inches and is 35 years old. And on the other hand, Sean Woodson is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 78 inches and is 31 years old. When it comes to striking, Alex Caceres lands 4.16 strikes per minute at a 50% accuracy. And Sean Woodson, on the other hand, lands 5.4 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Alex Caceres lands 0.56 takedowns on average at a 68% accuracy, while Sean Woodson, on the other hand, lands slightly higher at 0.76 takedowns on average with a slightly lower accuracy of 62%. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Alex Caceres absorbs 2.93 strikes per minute with a 63% striking defense and a 64% takedown defense, whereas Sean Woodson absorbs 4 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a much higher 84% takedown defense. Now let's check out Alex's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Giga Chikadze via unanimous decision, which was back in August of 2023. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Daniel Pineda, Julian Erosa, Seong Woo Choi, Kevin Kroom, and Austin Springer. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Sadiq Youssef, Kron Gracie, Wang Guan, and Jason Knight. His total record is 21 wins and 14 losses, and out of those 21 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 of them were submissions, and 10 were decision victories, which gives him a modest 52.4% finishing rate. And out of his 14 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, and 7 were submission losses, and the other 6 were decision losses. Now, Alex Caceres also has 4 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he's coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in June of 2023, and the most recent loss he had was back in August of 2023. Now let's check out Sean Woodson's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Charles Jourdain via split decision back in January of 2024. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Denis Basucha, Colin Anglin, Yusuf Zalal, and Kyle Bochniak. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Julian Erosa. His total record is 11 wins with only 1 loss to Julian. And out of all 11 of his wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 7 were decision victories, which gives him a pretty low 36.4% finishing rate. And his 1 loss was a submission loss. He's also had 3 first-round finishes. Recently, he's done really well. He's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently coming off of a 2-fight win streak. His most recent win was in January of 2024, and his most recent loss was actually quite a while ago. It was in June of 2020. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, my final pick as well, which takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. Only 1 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Alex, and the other 6 are leaning towards Sean. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 64.2% probability for Sean Woodson. And for my final prediction, I give him a slightly less confident 62% probability. And that's due to the fact that Alex has a 4% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 1.07 less strikes per minute, he has a 5% higher striking defense, and a 7% higher takedown accuracy. He also lands a little bit more submissions on average. But the reason I'm picking Sean Woodson, at least statistically speaking, is due to the fact that he has a height advantage of 4 inches, he's also 4 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 5 inches, he lands 1.24 more strikes per minute, he lands a little bit more takedowns on average, and he also has a 20% higher takedown defense. But let's step away from the stats for just a second. Not only does Sean Woodson have the height advantage, but he's able to use that advantage effectively in his fights to maintain distance. He makes it very difficult for his opponents to close in without taking a large risk, and Caceres will likely struggle to bridge that gap without being exposed to some nasty counterstrikes. Woodson also has great boxing skills. He has sharp and stiff jabs and straights, all while maintaining a safe distance from his enemies. He's great at controlling the pace and dynamics of a fight with his striking, which was easy to notice in fights such as against Denis Basucha. He also has great momentum coming into this fight. He handles pressure really well, and he performs well even against aggressive opponents. He has a tactical approach when it comes to his fight game. He's kind of patient when he needs to be, and then capitalizes on his opponent's mistakes. From what I've observed and noticed, I'd give him a pretty decent fight IQ rating, if I'm being honest, and I think he deserves it. A few other things that I wanted to mention: he's won 85% of his total fights, he's coming off of 2 wins into this fight, and he's won a majority of his fights in the UFC, and his last loss was all the way back in 2020. Now, he's not a big-time finisher, he's more about using his technical skills to control the fight. So I believe, given all of that research and fight film studying on him, I think this one's going to go to the judges, and that Woodson will win via unanimous decision. For the next fight, we have Alonzo Menifield versus Carlos Ulberg. Let's review their stats. Alonzo Menifield is 6 feet tall with a reach of 76 inches and is 36 years old. On the other hand, Carlos Ulberg is 6 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 77 inches and is 33 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Alonzo Menifield lands 3.92 strikes per minute at a 57% accuracy. Carlos Ulberg, on the other hand, lands 7.29 strikes per minute at a 59% accuracy. And as far as grappling goes, Alonzo Menifield lands 0.67 takedowns at a low 33% accuracy, while Ulberg, on the other hand, lands a slightly higher 0.95 takedowns on average with a much higher 75% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Alonzo absorbs 3.51 strikes per minute with a 49% striking defense and a 75% takedown defense, whereas Ulberg absorbs 3.59 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and a 75% takedown defense as well. Now let's check out Alonzo Menifield's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Dustin Jacoby via unanimous decision back in December 2023. And some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Jimmy Crute, Misha Kirkunov, Askar Mozarov, and Ed Herman. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include William Knight, Ovince St. Preux, and Devin Clark. Now, his total record is 15 wins and only those 3 losses. And out of his 15 wins, a majority of them were KO/TKOs, 10 to be exact. 3 were submissions and only 2 were decision victories, which gives him an 86.7% finishing rate. And out of his 3 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO and the other 2 were decision losses. He has 10 first-round finishes. Recently, he's done well. He's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a win streak of 2 coming into this one. His most recent win was in December of 2023, and his most recent loss was in December of 2021. Now let's check out Carlos Ulberg's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Dawoon Jung via submission back in September of 2023. His total record is 10 wins and only 1 loss, and out of those 10 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him an 80% finishing rate. And his only loss was a KO/TKO loss. He also has 5 first-round finishes, and recently has won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a winning streak of 5 wins in a row. His most recent win was back in September of 2023, and the most recent time that he lost was back in March of 2021. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film studying as well. Only 1 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Alonzo Menifield, and the other 6 are leaning towards Carlos Ulberg. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 67.4% probability of victory for Carlos Ulberg. Now for my final prediction, I give him a slightly less confident 64% probability of victory. But the reason that I'm going for him here is because statistically speaking, he has a height advantage of 4 inches, he's 3 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 1 inch, he lands 3.37 more strikes per minute, he has a 2% higher striking accuracy, a 3% higher striking defense, and he lands more takedowns on average as well with a higher accuracy. But let's step away from the stats for just a second. Ulberg has a strong background in kickboxing, where he found his success, and his kickboxing skill gives him a great set of striking skills that are no joke. He delivers these powerful and precise strikes, which will cause significant damage against Menifield, who is also a striker, but he does not match Ulberg's technical proficiency. Ulberg is also good at controlling the distance and landing several strikes while staying out of the range of return fire, and you might be wondering why. Part of it has to do with him being an orthodox fighter and having a great reach that he actually leverages, and another part of it is his conditioning. But MMA Data Guy, he seemed pretty exhausted in that debut fight. I know, but studying his fights after that, you can clearly see how he's improved his conditioning a bit, and he can carry a high pace while delivering powerful strikes. Now, he also trains out of City Kickboxing, who we talked about a little earlier in this video, and you already know the kind of fighters that they produce. And in case you forgot already, it is Adesanya, Volkanovski, Kai Kara-France, Dan Hooker, Shane Young, and Tyson Pedro, who are all very talented. So he has the technical striking, he has the physical advantages, he has good training and good momentum coming into this fight, which all positions him to likely win against Menifield. And if you still don't believe me, he's won 91% of his total fights, and he's finished 80% of his wins, 60% of which were via KO/TKO. He's also coming off that 5-fight win streak, and he's won 5 out of 6 of his UFC fights. I believe Ulberg will get the win in this fight, and I also think that he's going to get a KO/TKO finish as he continues to climb to the top. In the next fight, we have our main event, Derek Lewis versus Rodrigo Nascimento. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Derek Lewis is 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 79 inches and is 39 years old. And on the other hand, Rodrigo Nascimento is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 80 inches and is 31 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Derek Lewis lands 2.43 strikes per minute at a 50% accuracy. And Rodrigo Nascimento, on the other hand, lands more strikes per minute at 4.31, but at a similar accuracy of 48%. As far as grappling goes, Derek Lewis lands only 0.53 takedowns on average at a very low 26% accuracy, while Rodrigo Nascimento, on the other hand, he lands a much higher 1.2 takedowns on average with a slightly better accuracy of 33%. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Derek Lewis absorbs 2.48 strikes per minute with a 40% striking defense and a 53% takedown defense, whereas Rodrigo Nascimento absorbs 4.76 strikes per minute with a 43% striking defense and a 77% takedown defense. Now let's check out Derek Lewis's recent fight history. Now recently he's coming off of a loss against Jailton Almeida via unanimous decision, which was back in November of 2023. He's defeated some good talent such as Marcos Ferreira de Lima and Chris Daukaus, even Curtis Blades, and he's lost to guys like Sergey Spivak, Sergey Pavlovich, Tai Tuivasa, and Cyril Gahn, which was actually a championship fight. His total record is 27 wins and 12 losses, which is not too good, and out of his 27 wins, 22 were KO/TKOs, only 1 was a submission, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him an 85.2% finishing rate, and if you've watched any of his fights, you know he has heavy hands. Out of his 12 losses, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, which you could attribute to his really aggressive style. 2 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision losses. He also has 9 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 1 out of his last 5 fights, which is not good at all, and he's currently coming off of a loss into this fight. Now, switching over to the other side, let's check out Rodrigo Nascimento's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Dontel Mays via unanimous decision, which was also back in November of 2023. And some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Tanner Boser, Dontel Mays twice, and Michael Martinek. His only loss was a finish loss from Chris Daukaus. His total record is 11 wins and that one loss, and out of his 11 wins, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, 6 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision victories, which gives him a 73% finishing rate. He also has 6 first-round finishes, and recently he's done decent. He's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is on a 3-fight win streak coming into this one. His most recent win was in November of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in October of 2020. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations as well. 3 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Derek Lewis here, and 4 are leaning towards Rodrigo Nascimento. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 58.3% probability of victory for Rodrigo Nascimento. Now for my final prediction, I give Nascimento a slightly less confident 51% probability of victory, as due to the fact that Derek Lewis is an unpredictable fighter. You never know what kind of fighter you're going to get with him, and sometimes he just lands these powerful shots within the first round that just completely takes the fight over, knocks the guy out, and it's a done deal. But also statistically, Derek Lewis is the slightly taller fighter. He's a little bit more accurate with his shots, and he absorbs less strikes per minute. But the reason I'm choosing Nascimento is due to the fact that Nascimento is 8 years younger than him. He also has a reach advantage of an inch. He lands 1.88 more strikes per minute. He has a 3% higher striking defense. He lands a little bit more takedowns on average than him. He has a 7% higher takedown accuracy, and he has a 24% higher takedown defense. But let's step away from the stats for just a second in this analysis. Look, I know Derek Lewis is a powerful striker and a fan favorite. He's really fun to watch, and he's hilarious on the mic. And when he lands, he drops guys like there's no tomorrow. But there are several reasons why Nascimento will likely beat him this Saturday. And I know it's another unpopular opinion as well, but you guys know I do my research. I work hard to study all fighters. I watch their fights. I put in the hours. I study their advantages and their disadvantages, their training, their backgrounds, their skills and stats, all of that. Nascimento is a purple belt BJJ with a high degree of submission skill. I think that grappling advantage will be crucial against Lewis, who has historically shown vulnerabilities against fighters that have a solid ground game. Nascimento has the ability to control opponents on the ground. Now I know what you're thinking. Derek Lewis has the most knockouts. He holds the record. He's strong. But that's the thing. He's limited in his approach to mixed martial arts. He struggles against opponents that can take him down and control him on the ground. He just kind of lays there on his back. His stamina is almost non-existent to some extent, although he has been improving on that recently compared to a few fights ago. It's no surprise that his approach is generally less technical, which might set him up for failure against a technical guy like Nascimento. Not only that, but Nascimento is effective even in the later rounds of fights. He has better conditioning and a clear strategy advantage coming into this fight. Also, one thing that doesn't really get talked about enough is the lack of defense that Derek Lewis has and his questionable fight IQ at times. Here are the facts. Nascimento has won 11 fights and only lost twice. He's finished 73% of his fights, of which 55% have been submissions. 25% were decisions and 18% were KO/TKOs, so he has a pretty good balance between striking, grappling, and overall fight control. He's coming off of a 3-fight win streak. He's won 4 out of his 6 UFC fights, and his last loss was all the way back in 2020. Don't call me crazy, but Nascimento will get the decision or submission victory in this fight. Respect to Lewis and the energy that he brings in and out of the octagon and the power that he has behind those hands, but still, there's levels to this game, and I have to go with what my research, analysis, fight film studying, and, of course, what the stats are pointing towards. All of those things combined are leading to a Nascimento win. And with that said, those are all of the fights for UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Nascimento. I hope you all enjoyed and that your bets hit. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, do all that nice stuff. It would really mean a lot to me, and it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos for you all and continuing to do all my research. Running this data and analysis, the prediction models, the charts and graphs, and watching all those hours of fight history, all of that takes hours every single day and week. So I always appreciate all of the support that you guys show me. And please check out that Patreon if you would like to support me through there. There's a $5 and $10 monthly option if you would like to throw a little bit help my way. Thank you guys so much once again, and see you all in the next one.